Now it's the time of changes. Now is the time to move on. This is the time for solutions. Feel the motion. Be new is born. Really none of you. No one connected to you. Really none of you. Be new will do it for you. This is the time for solutions. Be new is for you.
Bienvenidos otra vez, esperamos que hayáis encontrado interesante la primera charla. Vamos ahora con el segundo panel, lo enmarcamos en las BZONEs Competitive y vamos a hablar de cómo crear la estrategia comercial adecuada para la zona económica. Constantemente las zonas económicas implementan estrategias para atraer potenciales inversionistas y convertirse en imanes de atracción de inversión extranjera. Sin embargo, las características de cada zona económica varían obviamente dependiendo de dónde están y de la vocación que tienen. De la mano de experimentadas expertas de Europa y de Oriente Medio, vamos a analizar cuál es la estrategia correcta para implementar en sus zonas. Para ello vamos a contar con una ponente online que es Krista Freiberga y con nosotros aquí tenemos también a Zoe Harris y Krista Fox. Bienvenidas. Y una vez más vamos a dar las gracias y la bienvenida a la vez a Courtney Finger, es editora jefe de Investment Monitor. Courtney, muy importante tener esta mesa redonda, además con expertas en una mesa 100% femenina. Con ellas te dejamos. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for the event organizers, Barcelona Free Zone, for allowing me to lead this session. Most of all, thank you to these three women who are joining too in real life, which is exciting to have real life people on the stage with me here after all this time. Welcome to Krista, and Zoe. Krista Fox is a partner and director of the EZDA Alliance. Krista Freiberger is a chief executive officer of Rezekne SEZ Authority, and Zoe is a project director at the World Free Zones Organization, also working with Krista in the Alliance. So I'll start, if I may, with Krista Fox. Maybe you can go big picture for us. Our purpose here is how to talk about creating the right commercial strategy for your economic zone, which of course is crucial to success, because if not generating returns, not succeeding, then there can be no zone. But that has always been a challenging task, maybe now more so than ever. A lot of zones competing for an ever shrinking pool of projects. So in your mind and in your experience, what makes for a successful zone commercially? And how is that evolving in this new paradigm?
Thanks, Courtney. And first of all, thank you to BNU for the invitation to participate in BNU Week in Barcelona, and Courtney for moderating this conversation, which I think is a very important conversation. And having previously led an economic zone, the first thing I would say is that actually I think it's a balance between thinking big and thinking in detail. What we're seeing in ESDA is a number of things. The first one is that successful economic zones develop a really deep understanding of investors' needs, and they do that through very practical means. They do it through having key account management teams. They do it through working very successfully with CRM tools that enables them to create relationships at all levels. And they're very interested in customising solutions to meet the investors' needs. So there are a lot of economic zones, I think, that are struggling today because they can't become very married to the regulations, and they don't want to flex and adapt those regulations, but that's often at the cost of the investors and their ability to be successful. I think the second thing that we're seeing in ESDA is that a lot of successful zones are innovating around the sharing economy. If you look at examples like the DMCC, they're working to create technology labs that enable companies to share facilities. Coyol in Costa Rica, Atlantis in South Africa with clean lab facilities that enable their investors to actually invest less but avail of excellent facilities. What we're also seeing is high levels of digitisation. it's no longer acceptable to be unable to interact with your investors in a highly digitised way, no matter where they are, sort of anywhere, anytime, any device. And there are still some very poor examples out there, unfortunately. When investors make decisions to join a zone, they may not place a great deal of importance on digitisation. But as things progress, it can become incredibly frustrating for investors because they waste a lot of time trying to avail of services. A couple of other things. The highly successful zones are developing commercial strategies that are actually focused on collaborating right across the ecosystem. In a lot of cases, that's about them curating relationships with other players, other stakeholders, to enable all investors to avail of services and interact and connect with each other. Couple more points. One is diversification. So we're seeing zones becoming more and more diversified. I think we're going to see a lot less of the clustered zones, the highly specialised zones. I call it clustered diversification. It's where zones have an immense amount of knowledge about certain industry sectors, but actually, a breadth and depth. And I think finally, what we're also seeing is umbrella regulators recognising that they have a role to play in making all economic zones in their countries more efficient. And that's something that perhaps we can touch on a little bit more later in this conversation.
Thank you. You've laid out there some important themes that we'll need to delve down into a little bit. You also mentioned some successful zones, DMCC, your former employer, and Coil Free Zone, which tees us up perfectly because we will have representatives from both of those zones in a later panel to talk about exactly how they are shaping their strategies post-COVID. But Zoe, I know something that's very close to your heart and something you're actively engaged in is the issue of sustainability and ESG. And there's obviously a big imperative these days to be mindful of ESG criteria and to have sustainability at the heart of any strategy for a free zone or an economic zone. How can that be married with the urgent need to create jobs and protect the bottom line?
Thank you, Courtney. First of all, thank you very much to BNU Barcelona and the full team for hosting me during this very important event. And thank you very much, Courtney, for moderating this session. It's an honor and delight to be part of it. So coming back to your question regarding how can we marry the SDG principles, bringing it into ESG and looking at competitiveness of the zone in creating jobs and its contribution to GDP on global levels or on a national level. And the Sustainable Development Goals were launched by the UN in 2015 during the agreement in Paris. And right then, the whole world was looking, or the world of investment and countries were looking at what's going to happen with these SDGs. We saw the movement of impact investment, so the world of finance more and more moving into the space of responsible investment, looking at the economic impact, social impact, environmental impact, and governance impact. And the exciting development here is that within impact investment, this is the fastest growing form of investment. Now, why am I mentioning this? Because ultimately, money and finance are enablers to facilitate and to boost trade and investment. So we have to look at, okay, what's the fuel needed here in order for us to facilitate these investments and create new jobs? So first of all, access to finance increases as soon as we emphasize the ESG profile of a company. So how can we enhance the ESG profile of a company is, for instance, also by locating in a zone which has adopted sustainable practices, which will impact the company's ESG profile. So this will enable the company to access finance, grow faster, create more jobs. So that's one aspect of it. On the other hand, if we're looking at a social perspective and sustainability, we're also looking at technology. How can we bring in technology to enhance the skills and the knowledge of the labor force? So this will also enable job growth within a country, and zones are particularly well suited to be able to bring in companies, enhance the level of digitization of especially emerging economies, and allow their labor to access certain knowledge and skills which would otherwise maybe take a longer period of time. So in terms of this, this will also contribute to employment within a country and not having to bring in foreign laborers, but actually creating jobs for the local communities. And in addition, also fostering SMEs located in the zone, because I think within the landscape of FDI, global value chains, the focus has always been very much on multinational enterprises, forgetting the fact that 80% of companies located in the special economic zones, or economic zones, how we call them nowadays, are in fact SMEs. So the adopting SDG principles or ESG principles will actually support SME development, private sector development, and growth.
Great. So the SMEs plus ESG equals SDGs. Can we make that cheesy set of acronyms work? Why not?
Within the context of economic zones, I agree with that principle. Yes.
Yes, but on a serious note, it seems that if companies with strong ESG credentials invest in zones that are mindful of sustainability, that is how we can create a virtuous circle.
Absolutely.
And see the benefits ripple out from there.
Fully agree. And also during the previous session, it was also touched up on, we're seeing more and more focus on also creating industrial symbiosis within the zones. We've been working with governments on creating eco-industrial parks with a economic zone regulatory framework around it, increasing its competitiveness in attracting FDI. And within the creation of the industrial symbiosis, we see a very exciting development also in terms of being able to scale this model to emerging economies, such as in Africa, looking at sustainable agricultural processing practices, for instance. So bringing in technology for water management, but also bringing in agri-tech in order to increase the outputs of the agricultural production within that country, and mainly adding value. It's all about value creation. How can we create value through the zones in a country, creating jobs and having a positive contribution to the SEG growth, GDP growth.
I think just to add another mix of letters in there, and
Exactly.
I think that's some good, solid and positive examples. And to take another example, we will turn to our other Krista who's joining us. First of all, some congratulations are in order. We just published yesterday Investment Monitor's Economic Zone Sustainable Recovery Strategy Awards, and Rezekne won a couple of awards, such as for aftercare and red tape reduction. So congratulations, Krista. How do you go about putting all of this that you've heard into practice, and how would you explain and articulate to us your commercial strategy and how it is evolving post-COVID? Oh, we're not hearing you, unfortunately. Oh, we'll give a moment, I think, to resolve this. No. I think we'll have to return to Krista, unfortunately. So I will pick on my in-person guest while we resolve the audio link issue. Krista Fox, you mentioned about digitalization, and we heard about this in our previous panel session as well. It's increasingly important. The digitization of economic zones, how can it be put into practice in a successful way, and how can it be leveraged for greater prosperity?
Yeah, I think it's a really important topic. As I said before, there are some laggards, and there are obviously zones that are really kind of moving forward in this respect. And you know, probably to your earlier point as well, about, you know, when we're setting vision, sort of the big picture, but also the devil's in the detail, and maybe that's sort of setting the scene a little bit in terms of digitisation. There are a few things that I see with digitisation. One is that over the next 5 years, I think it's highly likely that we'll have at least one, if not several, wholly digital economic zones. Probably, you know, catalysed by COVID and our recognition that it is easier than we first thought to connect and to do business in a virtual environment. And a lot of economic zones have been grappling for quite a period of time on, you know, how do I fit within the constraints of these regulatory requirements? And if we look at zones all over the world, there's been a lot of sort of red tape in respect of, if I set up a company, I also need a physical presence, and we all know that there are economic zones that have many companies, and particularly the SMEs, and Zoe referred to this earlier, SMEs drive economies, and we force them in many zones to take physical space, whether they need it or not. You know, thinking that it's good for them, thinking that it's good for us. And I think there are a lot of zones that will kind of, you know, be right down to that very last sort of dollar of revenue from leasing, and will have not noticed that the rest of the world has actually disrupted this notion. And in fact, for so many industries, that this notion is not flexible enough to take them forward. So we can look at digitisation in that context, and I think it's very exciting to look at it in that context. We're working with a government in Eastern Europe, and we're really looking at sort of how do we mix the two, how do we mix you know, a virtual zone and kind of get up and running with all of the right regulations in place and all the right compliance in place, and mix that with a physical. The second piece is around how do we put in place as an economic zone the right kind of digital platforms. I'm noticing, however, that I believe the other Krista may be up and running, and in the interest of fairness, I want to make sure she has the opportunity to speak. So perhaps I can talk on that later.
Yes, thank you for that. And you were mentioning the ease of connecting in a virtual environment, but we are living in real time some of the challenges in that as well. So hopefully, Krista, with apologies for the technical issue, hopefully we can hear your answer now. So just to remind you of the question, we really want to hear from you how you put into practice some of the principles that we've heard from Krista and Zoe, and how would you explain to us your commercial strategy and how it's evolving?
Hello, one more time. Do you hear me?
Yes,
we do. Okay. Wonderful. So it's a really great pleasure to be here for the first time. So at the beginning, big thank you for the opportunity to participate despite all the pandemic crisis which is happening at the time worldwide. So big thank you, and it's my pleasure to be here with you and to hear you. So I represent Razakne Special Economic Zone based in Latvia, as you described, thank you. And speaking about our commercial strategy, I can say that the main direction which we are working at is an individual approach to each potential and existing investor. We mainly perform an administrative function, providing help to solve some legal, PR, HR, financial attraction issues, pointing out such long-term strategic aims as, firstly, development of the infrastructure of the Razakne Economic Zone, Special Economic Zone territory, in order to facilitate business and attract investment. Secondly, promotion of the Razakne Special Economic Zone in order to increase its recognition at national and international level, in order to increase its recognition. And thirdly, effective management of Razakne Special Economic Zone with the aim to be oriented on the client and the goal. our authority and our authority's commercial strategy tries to attain the status of the most competent investor advisor in the region, providing support and consultations for new and already existing companies while starting a business and during the preparation of paperwork, meanwhile providing information about tax reliefs, free territories, properties in our area, workforce, and answers to the question. What is new for us today is at this moment we are actively working directly on marketing and PR function in order to become more recognizable on a wider scale, which is why we are signed an agreement with international company, dissemination of information on a larger scale, thus promoting Latvia and our region, especially Rezekne, as a place for the potential investment. At the same time, we are also starting to strengthen cooperation with local government and with local organizations that help entrepreneurs in Latvia, such as Chamber of Commerce and the Latvian Investment and Development Agency, informing about us, informing about Rezekne as authority as such, rental rights and ready-made real estate, land plots provided with communications and ready-made infrastructure, real estate, corporate income tax reliefs, a good strategic center for logistics, and so on. Among these things, together with the Rezekne City Council, we are trying to develop a strategy that forms a tripartite cooperation between authority as such, entrepreneurs, and the Rezekne educational institutions in order to resolve the issue of employees retaining new professionals in the region. So that is the way we are pursuing our strategy. So it's PR and marketing to attract new investors, infrastructure development to provide ready-made properties for construction for investors, and mutual interinstitutional cooperation, which I mentioned before, on labor resources and development issues in order to meet changing investor needs. So I'll, in brief, that's my answer to your question, and that's how we try to meet these investor needs, which are changing due to this crisis as well.
Thank you very much, and I think key to your strategy is this individual approach to each investor that you mentioned at the outset, and that is exactly why your zone received an award from Investment Monitor for aftercare, which has always been important but will be even more important going forward. So well done on those efforts.
Yes, thank you very much for the award as well.
You're most welcome. And Zoe, I'd like you to maybe following on from what Krista was discussing about digitalization. How does digitalization sit with sustainability, and in what ways could it maybe be an enabler of meeting the Sustainable Development Goals?
Thank you very much, Courtney. I think this is a very important question as we see it now shifting into the new paradigm, which has been accelerated by COVID-19. We are actually already shifting away from Industry 4.0 and we're moving into Industry 5.0, in which we are seeing augmented reality, and this is already a reality for us, being already accustomed to having Zoom meetings and having virtual events, and also with the zones being able to register a company virtually, and even the creation of virtual economic zones, but that's a different, well, we can go into that deeper later. As Chris already mentioned, there's already the opportunity to register a company digitally online, and we can actually start up and develop a new economic zone digitally, and then having the physical infrastructure follow. But coming back to the question on how digitalization plays a role in sustainability, in sustainable development of a zone, the two most important trends within economic zone development, which we see right now, are first of all digitalization, and second of all sustainability. So bringing these two together is how we see it is if we categorize in terms of ESG, looking at the E for environment, how can digitalization play a role in E for environment? That is, first of all, water and waste management systems. That is on a very basic level. We are dealing with high levels of climate change. There are issues with availability of water, clean water, especially if we're looking at export processing zones, especially with focus on Africa, the agri-processing zones, agricultural development, food security, which we're also seeing in the Middle East, the GCC countries where we are based. So technology plays, or digitization plays a very crucial role in water management systems. So also bringing them into, for instance, agri-tech, in which we can make a more efficient use of water in terms of agricultural outputs. There are ways in which you can even capture water from humidity from the air. We're seeing that at the Netherlands Pavilion at Expo 2020 in Dubai right now. They demonstrating this technology that you can capture humidity from air, and even within the pavilion, they have a facility producing 800 liters of water per day, which is a technology which can be adopted to zones and production facilities. And in that sense, we will need a certain level of digitization to be able to enable this. So that digital infrastructure within the zone has to be there. So we're not only looking at physical infrastructure, but the digital infrastructure of a zone. Furthermore, looking at the E for environment is food security. So what I just touched upon is the agri-tech development. We've seen the supply chain disruptions, especially during times of COVID, but in general, global value chains are changing. The disruption is the new normal. If it's not COVID, it's climate change issues. We've seen the blockage of the Suez Canal recently and what kind of implications that had. So countries, regions are focusing on creating resilience in terms of producing their own food, and therefore we also need a certain level of technology as an enabler to do so. And the zones are specific limited geographical areas in which these technologies can easily be applied and also used as an incubator or as a test ground to be able to scale to the larger economy or to the host economy of that location. Then furthermore, waste management, we are dealing with environmental issues, climate issues. We need to reduce our carbon footprint. So waste management is increasingly important, and therefore we need digitization and certain new technologies to enable waste management systems, and also in terms of industrial symbiosis. So how can we turn the waste of the one company into the resource or fuel for the next company? And therefore we also need digitization. Furthermore, if we look into the S for the social aspect within the ESG, technology is very important in terms of connectivity. We first had increased globalization. We're looking at a global landscape. Supply chains, value chains cover the globe. So if we want to develop as a country or move up the value chain, we want to take part in global value chains. And digitization plays a very important role in connecting people, connecting trade, because ultimately trade is about people and we need these interactions. So digitization enables this interaction and will link the companies and the people working in the companies within the zones, but also the linkages with the host countries, the mainland suppliers, connections, building those communities, and at the same time also expanding global connections. So in terms of trade expansion, but also building partnerships. The future, that's also one of the SDGs, are partnerships. I believe it's SDG number 17. And we need this technology to be able to connect and build these relationships and partnerships, moving towards a new paradigm in which collaboration is key. Then governance is the third aspect, the G for governance within ESG, looking at what role does digitization or digitalization have to play in that. Digitalization is a very important contributor to transparency, to fair practices, and zones having a different regulatory framework have been focal points in the past regarding issues focusing on tax evasion or illicit trade, and therefore the World Free Zones Organization has come up with a safe zone model, encouraging zones to be compliant and to be safe in terms of best practices, in terms of governance, and also aligning with, for instance, customs. So digitalization will allow for digital inventory systems. We're also looking at single windows, bringing together customs and tax authorities within the digital framework of a zone, also facilitating trade, so have quicker turnaround times, so boosting the performance of the companies within the zones, and at the same time being compliant. These tools actually allow for pre-clearance of goods coming into zones, being able to process these trade flows much quicker, so we're having a much less disruption and less bottlenecks within the zones. So digitalization also helps overcome regulatory bottlenecks. And also looking at a trend as blockchain will also tie into the digital governance models within the zones. And I could carry on for a long time, and I think this might have covered the question.
No, you've covered it well, and it's good to spell it out with each part of the ESG equation. But it seems that the main link is in creating efficiencies, which can not only solving problems that the world has, but creating efficiencies. And one of them, I suppose, is in investment promotion as well. Krista mentioned about the promotional plans that her zone is carrying out, and digital tools allow for greater efficiency in engaging investors. If we return to Krista, and you described to us your strategy for attracting investment, engaging and supporting existing investors, and amplifying your message to the world. How will you take this strategy forward into the next year as the global economy moves to recovery, and how optimistic are you of continued success?
Yes, thank you for your question. As for commercial strategy in the future, it can be said that in principle we are currently working on it, and it's a process of development of this strategy and plan. I can say that in this year in Latvia, a comprehensive territorial reform has taken place, which dictates that the city and the region in whose territory we operate must develop one development strategy. And at present, we as an authority are also involved in the making process of development and commercial strategy that gives us more opportunities to represent the wishes and needs of investors and entrepreneurs, including recovery activities not only in our plan or budget, but strengthening them also at the municipality and even in national level. Of course, it is also worth mentioning that the commercial strategy also provides financial support for our investors and existing entrepreneurs. We did it last year, and we will continue to provide additional financial resources to entrepreneurs this year, also to eliminate the consequences of this pandemic crisis. Overall, we are optimistic. We are currently working on a budget, and it's worth mentioning that next year our authority will turn 25. which means that we have developed it so far. But it's time for something new for us as well. And what you mentioned already before, what the COVID crisis has taught us is that everything can be organized also remotely. In this case, it gives us more opportunities to organize more meetings, even online, but to create joint networking, conferences, and discussions, bringing together entrepreneurs and investors and industry experts, which is what we will do definitely next year, and didn't do so much so far because it seemed that we have to meet only present and in person, but now we can do it also online, and that seems normal nowadays. As we have launched this international investment campaign, we look forward to hearing for new investors as well. And I'm 100% sure that there are big things to come, and that I hope that our region will become more popular and more entertaining for possible investors, and also successful for existing ones as well. What is about our territory, it's seeing a huge development and generating an abundance of new opportunities. Next year we will have a new factory and new logistics center. That is why we are optimistic about new opportunities for investors in our region as well. This also, as I mentioned, industrial park, and also with all engineering and communication possibilities will be already built. And I think that the most important thing is that Rezekne as a city and the region is developing city. The spirit of progress and innovations is what makes Rezekne such a striking investment project, and with so much development already made and much more underway and still to come, there's a huge opportunity to those who recognize it. That's why I hope that this investment campaign will be a big jump towards recognition worldwide and towards opportunity to speak about our zone, to speak about our region, and to get to know investors and us as authority and region better for everyone. So I think that it's very challenging time to come, but I hope that everything will be okay, and we will hear more and more about our zone as well. So thank you.
Thank you. A very challenging time indeed, but it seems you do have all the building blocks in place, so wish you continued.
We hope so.
we wish you continued success as you look to celebrate the 25th year of your zone next year.
Yes.
I want to
pick
up on something that Krista said to pose to Krista. In her first answer, Krista mentioned about the importance of cooperation with other entities, local stakeholders, but also the business community. And I know that's something that you work on a lot as well. So how can zones deepen their engagement with the existing business community?
Yeah, I think it's for me, it's an essential pillar of any economic zones strategy, actually. And when I walked into the DMCC, which is now 8 years ago, I was at the helm there for 6 years, and we were named Global Free Zone of the Year by FDI magazine 5 of those years. And, you know, the reason I mention that is because I think it was highly as a result of a number of things. One, digitisation, and we're obviously talking about that today. But the other was this, you know, very genuine interest in how do we connect with the zone. And the first thing we said as a team was, you know, what is our philosophy here? At that time, we were regulating 3,500 companies, and we said, well, we actually have a duty and we need to honour the investment that these entities have made in selecting to come and set up their footprint within our economic zone. So rather than being focused on sort of outward looking and investor attraction, we actually said for a number of years our entire focus is actually on the companies that are already in the zone. And it proved to be a very successful strategy because it really honed us in on are we creating opportunity for the companies that are already here, or are we putting red tape in their way? And the very first way of discovering that is by asking questions and listening. And so we really set about creating all possible ways in which we could find out what is going on for the companies within our zone. We also recognise that there are all sorts of stakeholders within every company. There are not just CEOs that we need to forge relationships with. There are people within organisations at all levels that actually have to interact with their regulator. And so again, we set about figuring out how can we talk to the people that are there, every day sort of asking for services and waiting and being frustrated and having to go back to sort of their offices, having achieved nothing, and make their lives easier. But also, how do we engage with the CEOs and the C-level teams and find out about their ideas? And we did that in many ways. We did that through conferences, we did that through town halls, we did it in digital ways, surveys, many that seem very obvious. But in the end, successful strategy is not about, in my view, whether you have the best strategic ideas. It's whether you actually execute on those ideas, and I think that's where we were quite successful. One of the unexpected but wonderful outcomes of connecting was that at some point we realised we've got some immensely talented people within this zone, and they're just as interested in its success as we are. So how do we capture their talents and get them to work alongside us and help us to develop the strategy and help us to experiment and test new ideas? And so we started to create this thinking around experimentation, and we would invite people from within the zone that had particular technical expertise. We had lawyers, we had financiers, we had technologists, and they would actually sit alongside our team, not at the point of kind of final implementation, but at the point of ideation. And then they would be sitting alongside, very, very senior people willing to give their time, sitting alongside our team saying, actually, we think it would be better if we did it this way, or if you did it this way for us. And I think what happened there is it changed the culture of connection. It was no longer us and them, it was all of us together. How can we make this something that really works for everybody? And that was a culture that took time to evolve, but became, I think, very powerful, and catalysed many, literally hundreds of small and big improvements that created an economic zone that today is still winning Global Free Zone of the Year awards, not because it has one or two people that are creating that, but rather a whole ecosystem of people that are very interested in its success.
And how relevant is it to try to connect the companies operating in zones with the domestic business community in the location? Because it would be very easy to operate in a silo.
I think it's critically important, and we sort of developed a philosophy that we were going to try to create as many enabling services for our business community as possible. But we saw that it would be very sensible, or maybe I should approach it differently. We saw that it would not be very sensible if we tried to do them all ourselves. We didn't have the knowledge, we didn't have the deep experience and expertise in every single sector. What we did have was this growing ecosystem from 3,500 to 7,000, and when I left, I think 16,000 companies, and today it's 18,000. So that scale enabled us to be able to reach out and create conversations, and we did that increasingly with providers. Primarily, we had sort of a zone first philosophy, which is we want to first find the talent within our own economic zone, and if that exists, then we will actually enter into a commercial arrangement with these entities so that they can provide sort of favourable services, whether that's because it was more easily accessed or at preferential rates to the companies within our zone. When we couldn't find those companies in our zone, then we would go to the base economy, as sort of our Saudi collaborators call it, the base economy. But this is very important. We're there to forge connections and relationships. That's what business is all about, particularly I think in the Middle East with economic zones and in developing countries. When investors come in and they're foreign investors, they don't know who to turn to. So who better than to turn to your regulator or enabler who have already done the vetting, already figured out what is required, already sort of evaluated the credibility of these sort of connecting entities, and provide insurance, provide the company stamp. It seems silly, but or I could run around for 5 hours trying to find that for myself. In the age of digitisation, I know we shouldn't talk about company stamps. Invested a huge amount of time in creating a single window straight through bank setup. I mean, that was immensely powerful. And probably the project I'm proudest of in my time at the DMCC, in which we're also now working with other zones, is digital signatures. It's 20-year-old technology that is so incredibly enabling, and now we don't have to shuffle pieces of paper. Now that, of course, required collaboration with other players in the economy to do that. And probably a final point there is, when we talk about symbiosis, we're seeing now umbrella regulators in the Middle East, and I probably can't mention which country, but umbrella regulators that are really trying to enable. If we look at digital signatures as an example of that, there are far-reaching implications of our ability to create services and get them done very, very quickly, instead of wasting time on non-value add for companies that are just trying to run their businesses. So I think those are some of the things that economic zone leaders really should be looking at.
Yeah, I think the digital signature is key, and DMCC was always a leader in kind of showing the way on how to create these efficiencies through digital processes. I think we can all agree there still are a lot of stamps going on, still a lot of, so we can all look forward to a day when there's no such need for an actual rubber stamp to get things going.
I think one more important point very quickly is we're also now seeing the emergence of operating companies. So if you think of the hotel industry, we have our asset owners, we have our brands, and we have our operating companies sitting in the background that have already developed all the processes, the procedures, and the digital platforms. This is something that ESDA is working on, because there are players in this ecosystem that know exactly how to register, license, permit, create visas, connect all the value-added services. If you're a new economic zone trying to do all that, everything is new. It's cumbersome. It's difficult and it's complex. There are providers who already know. They've made all of the mistakes, and now they know how to do it right. I would also say this is a very valid way of growing your economic zone into the future as well.
Yeah, it's a good point to draw on that expertise that's already there, not try to reinvent the wheel if others have cracked the code for how to do it. We're coming now time to conclude, but I want to thank our fantastic panelists. Thank you, Krista and Zoe, for joining me here, so I'm not so lonely on the stage. Thank you, Krista, for joining us, making use of the digital tools to join us from Latvia, and we're going to talk a lot more about more of these topics as we go on, and as I mentioned, we're going to hear from representatives of some of these other successful zones that were mentioned in this discussion, such as DMCC and COIL, so stay tuned. Thank you very much for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Online, thank you also Krista and Zoe. Courtney, we're going to meet again at 2 p.m. Ahora lo que vamos a hacer es hacer una pequeña pausa. A la 1 vamos a volver con el primer inspirational speaker. Es Anxo Pérez, que nos va a traer la conferencia Happiness is a Matter of Strategy. Perdón. A las 2 en punto volvemos con el siguiente panel, que nos va a acompañar también Courtney Fingar. Gracias, hasta ahora.